Hello, good evening, everyone. I'm absolutely delighted to welcome you all to this tasting, this webinar of about Weinert, and we're so delighted that Iduna Weinert is with us. Iduna is Bernardo's daughter. Bernardo Weinert founded the winery with a famous 1977 vintage. And he's still there in the background, but Iduna really is now managing director, I think, are you? Or CEO, I don't know what it is. But you do virtually everything apart from make the wine. And so who better to take us through the information about Weinert than Iduna? So I'm going to hand over to Iduna.
Well, thank you very much, Toby. Good evening, everyone. Well, first of all, thank you very much for connecting in this transatlantic online webinar tasting. New times, new era, but it's great to be in touch with all of you. And thank you, Toby, very much. Not the CEO yet, but I do manage all the sales. That's kind of where I'm strong at. But as you well said, I'm the second generation in front of Bodega Viner, which is my family's business down here in Argentina. We have been with the Wine Society for many years, more than 20 years. So it is one of our dearest importers around the world. And obviously it is such a pleasure to be in touch with all of you members and everyone at the Wine Society. So I have prepared a presentation just to run through a little bit of what Weinert is all about, where we come from, why my father from Brazil established himself in Argentina, and of course, talk about Mendoza, Malbec, and all of the beauty that we have down here in terms of vine growing and wine industry. So let me just put this up and let's see if it still works. I think that's up and running. So 45 years ago, in 1975, my father decided to invest in the wine business. 45 years is quite a long time for Argentina, especially with our ups and downs. Obviously, very, very young, so I'm just the second generation in front of the business, but we've always been more of a classical style of wine and winery as well, right? So a lot of history that we want to keep within our hands and within our wines. So just to situate ourselves where we are, Argentina, obviously in South America, so quite a big country. It's almost 2.8 square kilometers in terms of area. And the red thing is where Mendoza is, right? So I think it's really interesting always to situate ourselves in the map to understand why Mendoza as our main wine region, but also all of the other regions, Salta, Rioja, San Juan, Rio Negro, they're all around the Andes, which make them very, very special, especially because we are very far away from the Atlantic coast, right? So one thing that characterizes Mendoza is the extreme continental climate. There's practically no sort of influence from big masses of water. That is due from the Atlantic coast. It's very far away. So it's 1,600 kilometers from the Atlantic coast. So all of the current from the Atlantic, it doesn't get to Mendoza. If we look at the map, we can see around Buenos Aires, the greener regions, the Pampa, so all of the cattle farming, the gauchos, everything that Argentina is also very well known for. And as we go into the west, so inland, it becomes very, very dry. Mendoza is actually a semi-desert, a semi-desertic climate. From the west, so from Chile, although we're very close to Chile and very close from the Pacific Ocean, only 420 kilometers from the Pacific coast, where Mendoza is exactly where it is the narrowest and the highest of the Andes wine region, of the Andes region. So I've put here on this map the Aconcagua, for example, which is right at the same latitude, which is almost 7,000 meters. So what this creates is a wall of mountains that block any sort of Pacific current of humidity. It rains in Chile, it snows a lot more in Chile, and that does not cross over the Andes into Mendoza. So very dry, very desertic, volcanic region. so at the same time, fertile soils. And also due to this volcanic and the difference in soils, it's great varieties of different terroirs, alluvial and colluvial. So everything is from, you know, the land streaming down through the Andes and into the plains of Mendoza. This is, so first of all, to talk about a little bit about vine growing. Mendoza, being a desert, it was founded in 1561, so right at the beginning of the Spanish colonization, but it wasn't until 1853 that this gentleman, a French immigrant called Michel Pouget, introduced the first French grape varieties. So before that, it was basically País or Criolla, as we call it here in Argentina. And in 1853, so just over 150 years ago, is that Mendoza began looking into the wine industry in a professional type of industry and economy to pursue. This gentleman, Michel Pouget, was an ampelographer who first landed in Chile by the mid-1800s in 1840, and then came to Argentina, invited by the Argentine government to professionalize the wine industry. And this guy is the one who is responsible for introducing Cabernet Sauvignon, Cabernet Franc, Merlot, Chardonnay, Sauvignon Blanc, and of course, Malbec. Malbec adapted very well to Mendoza, adapted very well to the climate, to this very dry desertic climate, and especially in Lujan de Cuyo, which is considered in Argentina to be the cradle of Malbec. So we're zooming into now the region to Mendoza in terms of wine region. Lujan de Cuyo is considered to be the cradle of Malbec in Argentina. So right in this, all of this beautiful wine region is where the first plants were brought over in 1853. One thing that makes Malbec in Argentina so special and so interesting is that this was from the pre-phylloxera era in France. So as we all know, Malbec is not originally from Argentina, it's from the southwest of France, from Cahors, actually a region around Bordeaux. And all of these beautiful vines were brought before the phylloxera disaster happened in France, which practically wiped out all of the Malbec and most of the vineyards across Europe, actually. So what makes Malbec so important and such a flagship in terms of quality for Argentina is that we have a really interesting genetic clones and variety of originally ungrafted French roots of Malbecs. The many vineyards around Lujan de Cuyo, which are more than 100 years old, planted in 1890, 1900s, 1902, so very old vines of Malbec, but especially ungrafted and original French roots, which brings over, together with the adaptation of Malbec to the region, to this very desertic climate, different altitudes as well, makes it such an important grape for Mendoza. Together with that, obviously, Cabernet Sauvignon, Merlot, all of the other French and Italian varieties as well. We get a lot of Bonarda, some Sangiovese, Tempranillo from Spain. So many European grapes planted around Lujan de Cuyo has been to Mendoza. Mendoza is actually quite a flat land, so very gentle slopes around this area, but still altitudes that go from 600 meters to up to 1,100 meters of altitude. So you do get a lot of variety in terms of terroir and in terms of temperature exchange as well. So very interesting to see wider wine regions within what we call the primera zona, the first zone. Beautiful picture of a vineyard. This is a very typical picture from Mendoza. So this is to show exactly what I was talking about, the mountains as a wall that block completely all the specific currents, and snowfall. Being a desert or semi-desert, it is very important. Irrigation and water supply is one of the most critical parts in any agricultural activity in Mendoza. So not only vineyards, but garlic, onions, cherries, pears, apples. So all of the agriculture in Mendoza depend exclusively on irrigation. Right now, we're on the end of our autumn and going into our winter, so very first snowfalls on the Andes, which winter is obviously also very important, so that water supply afterwards during the summer from the melting of the snow in the mountains is what is going to irrigate. So that also enhances the minerality that this water brings from the mountains as well. So very interesting and beautiful, beautiful region. This is one of our vineyards in Lujan de Cuyo. So here it's a little bit about the irrigation as well. As you can see, we do a lot of flooding irrigation. So that also helps, since it's a very porous, sandy, rocky soil, very dry, evaporates very quickly. We irrigate in a very traditional way, which is the flooding irrigation. And all vineyards are always oriented from north to south. So as the sun comes up in the east and goes out on the west, we get the most of the sun exposure, which is also something which is very well known for in our wines, obviously for Malbec as well, but all of the other grape varieties, to get that extra maturation of the grapes, the tannins, and complexity in terms of the aromatic that we can get from the grape itself. This is Weinert. This is Bodega Viner. The winery itself is this beautiful colonial, very, very big, tall building. It was built in 1890 by a Spanish family called Otero. And at that point, it was called Bodegas Fontan. It was abandoned around 1920 or 1930. And my father, Bernardo, he is from the south of Brazil. And he started visiting Argentina through the international transport business. So Mendoza, since it's very close to Chile, it is the most important passage from Chile to Argentina across the Andes. So he started visiting Mendoza back in the late 60s and early 70s, and basically fell in love with the passion that Argentines have for their wines, the beauty of Mendoza as a region. And as he passed by this beautiful winery, which was abandoned, he decided to invest in the wine business. So he bought this dilapidated winery. At the same time, being within the international transport business and Brazil being an important import country, and very, just as the UK, you can find wines from anywhere in the world in Brazil, he really loved all the beautiful Bordeaux blends that you could get in Brazil. And he saw the potential in Argentina to produce high quality wines in a European style, which is also a cultural inheritance within the country, but bringing out all of this beauty of this very sunny and vibrant region, which is Mendoza. So for that, they rebuilt the winery. So that was 2 years of a lot of reconstruction and transforming a big winery from being millions of liters into smaller tanks, smaller vats, and also looking into producing high quality wines to go into the export market. That's where, through international transport, he had all the contacts, but especially to compete in terms of quality and in terms of personality with, you know, the whole international market, especially European wines, which were by then very much ahead. Well, it is still nowadays, but very, very much ahead from Argentina. This is my father with, as Toby said, the legendary 1977 vintage. So during 2 years of rebuilding the winery, finally in 1977, we had our first vintage produced, a 100% Malbec, which is considered to be one of the very, very first 100% Malbecs produced in Argentina. This is my father 10 years ago, but he looks pretty much the same. And this is where Vineyard starts being this iconic producer in terms of the quality of the wines and the proposal as well. This 77 vintage has also been considered a legend within the wine industry. And until nowadays, we still have a couple of bottles in our cellars. So whenever Argentina does special events, special tastings, master of wines or master sommeliers, we're always selected because it also is such a beautiful wine to show the potential of aging that Malbec has and Argentine wines have as well. I'm always amazed whenever I taste a 77 vintage because it's still showing this very interesting fruit and beautiful elegance and balanced wines. So it is for us, of course, it's a huge honor, and I'm very, very proud of what Argentina can get, and obviously looking into the future as well. As Toby said, I am not the winemaker. I'm in charge of sales, but these are the two artists that we have had at Vineyard. So Don Raúl de la Mota on the left was our winemaker from 1977 up to 1996. Don Raúl here in Argentina, he's considered to be the father of modern winemaking and of high quality wines. He was a huge fan of Malbec. He was a huge fan and a very good friend with Émile Peynaud. And back in the 70s, Argentina was very focused on very high volume domestic market and low quality wines. So when he met my father and they partnered at Vineyard, the focus of Don Raúl has always been, since the start, to produce wines that each grape has their own and optimum maturation point, and then getting all of this European school of winemaking, the aging process in big old oak casks, right? 1977, Hubert takes over. Hubert is actually Swiss. He came to Argentina in 1996 for a one-year practice and ended up staying with us until nowadays. I'm sure that he's watching this on YouTube right now. And as a Swiss winemaker, and very young winemaker back then, he was touring the world, enamored as well by cask aging. He had been in Austria, he had been in northern Italy, and when he tasted in Switzerland in the early 90s, the Cavas de Weinert, our cask selection, he decided to come to Argentina and do this one-year practice and finally stayed with us until nowadays. So 1997 was Hubert's first vintage as our winemaker, and he is our first winemaker until nowadays. So always looking into preserving and focusing on this very long spaces of time, long periods of aging, and down at our cellars. One of the magical and most important parts of Vineyard is exactly our cellars. This is one of the reasons why one of our top wines is called Cavas. Cavas is cellar in Spanish. And this is where we have our beautiful cask collection. So our casks, they vary in terms of volume between 2,000 to 6,000 liters. There is one cask that we have, which is a 44,000 liter cask brought to Argentina from the Austrian-Hungarian Empire in the early 1900s. But we have more than 230 casks at the cellars at the same time. So as you can see from the picture, these are very big old oak casks. And this is exactly where we age our wines, all of our red wines, for 2 years, 3 years, 10 years, 20 years, who knows, whatever it needs, really. And this very slow aging process, which is very particular for the New World, very particular for Argentina, is what brings such a huge personality to our wines. So if we think of these big toneles or these big casks, the amount of wine, the volume of wine that is within a 6,000 liter cask, compared to the surface area which is touching the wine in contact with the oak, it is actually very small. So that way we can age the wine for a longer time, 5 or 10 or 15 years or up to 23 years, without overtopping it with oak. And at the same time, it keeps the fruit expression, that freshness of that vibrancy of the fruit, which is so well known for Argentina, which we want to keep. But at the same time, it allows the wines to develop all of its complete bouquet, especially in terms of the tertiary aromas. So Weinert is always this very, layered wines, deep wines. Complexity for us is exactly that, is the deeper you get, the more layers, the more the wine speaks to you, the more anecdotes, the more stories you can tell. So since the first glass from a recently opened bottle down to the last one after 1.5, 2 or 3 hours, the wine is always evolving and just telling you about all of these years of aging within our cellars. At the same time, the first question that everyone asks for us is, how old are these casks? These are mostly 50 to 6 years old by their grand majority. And then the second question is, how do you keep them for such a long time? Is it forever? In Austria, there are many casks that are more than 200 years old. And one of the very important things at Vineyard is exactly the maintenance of the cask. So as we take the wine out after the aging process, let's put it in 10 years, the maintenance and the cleaning of the cask is very important. So you enter a cask. This is also interesting to see how big a cask is inside. And around the belly of the cask, so all through the inner, the inner wood of the cask, tartaric acid crystals form during the aging process. So we scrape off the whole wall, right, inside the cask. It's not meant to go into the new wood. It's just millimeters of wood which is scraped off. But in that sense, we also renew the wood which will be in contact with the wine, or the new wine that is coming into this cask as well. After this, a lot of hot water. All of this material is also analyzed to see how the microbiology of this cask, of one particular cask, is performing. So a lot of hot water, a lot of the hygienic part of the cask is exactly what keeps the cask in such a beautiful and such a well preserved form of aging wine as well. After this, the outer part of the cask is also very important. Although the cellars are in 14 to 16 degrees in temperature Celsius and 80% humidity, so it is a special and optimum way or room to age wines. It is very important that the wood, the outer part of the cask, is also hydrated. So there is also a cleaning, a constant cleaning of each one of the casks, and then we paint it with linoleum oil, which is basically odorless, but it does keep the wood completely hydrated so that the cask is also not leaking from any part. So it is a lot of hard work together with 230 casks. But that is one of the reasons why the magical part, where we can age our wines for such a long time without overtopping it with oak and allowing all of the tannins and all of that complexity of the wines, of the new wines of Mendoza, to tame down and become, leathery and soft and velvety. So that's exactly where we want to get our wines, a very, big personality in terms of wines as well. This shows exactly the cleaning of the outer part. So as you can see, it's kind of this perfect, very, very clean and very hydrated wood. This is a beautiful piece that we have. This is Baco, or Dionisio, the god of wine. And this cask was brought to Vineyard in to crown the first vintage in 1977. So very, very beautiful piece of work from a local artist in Mendoza. Again, after this aging process, very important, the bottle age, also very important to mention. So what I love about cask aging and cask winemaking, and actually we have one very interesting wine which we released together with Toby, I think it was 2017, called Tonel Único, single cask, is that each cask has a very distinct personality. So within this collection of 230 casks, you might have the same wine from the same vintage, picked on the same day, everything is exactly the same, and you put it in 2 casks, and after 10, 20 years, you have 2 different wines. And all of this collection, all of this versatility, and all of this complexity in terms of personality of casks during our blending process, and I love to talk about Hubert in that sense because I consider him to be one of the world's most fabulous master blenders there is. The blending process within casks is very, very important. Right? So you've got one cask which might bring up a lot more of the fruit expression, another one which has a little bit more of the acidity, the other one, the floral expression, the one which has the more rounder tannins, and that makes up a varietal, but a more round varietal as well. And then we've got some casks like the Tonel Unico, which are so beautiful and so expressive by themselves, and so much more, I mean, such a superlative wine that instead of blending it with the normal vintages or the normal releases, we decide to age it a little bit longer and then do these single lot, very special parcels, which are called the Tonel Unico or single casks. And this is why we always also put on the label what the cask is, what the number of the cask is, right? So a lot of wine and a lot of history and a lot of stories all the time running around Weinert. And after this very long aging process, afterwards, the wine within the bottle is also very important to let it rest before shipping out, right? If you can imagine a wine which has been resting peacefully within a cask when it's bottled, it is important to let it settle again, just to get it back into its harmony and then release. So also, if somebody has been to Vineyard, you've probably seen there are always, bottles aging around the winery. Who has not been to Vineyard, obviously very invited as soon as frontiers open up and we can all travel around wine regions again. But time at Vineyard is a different time, put it that way. It's one of our biggest allies and one of our biggest assets as well. Tasting rooms and what is now the wine shop, which unfortunately it's closed, but also beautiful colonial architecture. So a little bit of piece of history of the architecture of the Spanish colonies in Mendoza. I had to put something out for the asado as well. Our wines are very, very foodie wines, both for vegetarians as for carnivores. Here in Argentina, we're mostly carnivores, I have to admit, but it is something that we have always looked for. My father is a huge, huge cook. He loves cooking. He likes to eat. So am I. My whole family, we have always been brought around the kitchen. Hubert, his grandfather was a chef at a hotel, a five-star hotel in Switzerland. So food pairing and wine with food is something that is always one of the ticks that on our tasting notes must be at a 10 is how our wines perform with different foods, and obviously the asado is one of the most important ones down here in Argentina. So beautiful sunny weather like it is right now in the UK, lovely vegetables, very fresh, lovely meat. So always this freshness is also something we want to bring out in our wines. And then these are the three wines that we have today at the Wine Society. And then I will stop sharing, I think. Toby, do you want to join in? And we can see how we are going to stop sharing here.
Certainly, I think
I didn't run through too much.
No, it was great. It was great, Iduna. Thanks very much. I think that behind the scenes, we have Emma, who's maybe got some questions to field. Have you got some questions, Emma?
How deep is the cellar? Of the cellar?
I do actually. We've had multiple questions about two of the special releases that the Wine Society has been involved in. So there's the Tunnel 111 1994 Malbec and the multi-vintage blend. Could you tell us a bit more about these wines, both Iduna and Toby? And in particular, when the 1994 might best be enjoyed as well?
Okay, so the Tonel Unico 111 or the Malbec 94, it's actually a project that Toby and Hubert, our winemaker, put together. I think it was 2015 maybe, or 2016, Toby. So Toby has been traveling to Argentina since the late 90s, and always going around the cellars. There was this one particular cask, the 111, a Malbec 1994. From Vistalba, so that's a wine region which is a little bit higher in altitude within Lujan de Cuyo. And there are a couple of really interesting things to talk about this wine. First of all, it was one of the very last vintages of Don Raúl, but not only Don Raúl at Weinert, but also Roberto de la Mota. So Roberto de la Mota, Don Raúl's son, who you also can enjoy his wines at the Wine Society with Mendel and La Revancha, so beautiful wines as well. It was one of the very last vintages of them together at Vineyard. And this particular wine was such a difficult wine to tame. It was such a difficult wine to age. It needed so much more aging than its peers that it did not go into the blend of the normal Weinert Malbec or the Cavas de Weinert. And until the idea came of producing these wines, these very, very special lots, to show the personality of a cask. Right? So it was bottled in April of 2017. So that's 23 years of aging in a 5,800 liter cask, so one of the bigger ones, right, the rounder ones. And I am a huge fan of this wine. And as I came back to the business, I was working in the coffee business, and I came back to the business exactly in May of 2017 was when I first saw this really interesting wine, tasted it, and I thought it was such a fabulous idea to produce these single casks and single lots. In terms of when it is best to have the wine or to taste the wine, magnums in that sense are the best bottles to age wines. That's what we have found. And I know that we had both 750 and magnums to the Wine Society. And basically the basic physics out of this is that you've got a double volume for the same cork diameter. So that reduces tremendously the amount of oxygen interchange that you have with wine. So if you've got a magnum, I would definitely keep it for another maybe 10 years, 15 years, 20 years. The wine right now, it's still very vibrant. It's still very brioso. How would you call brioso? It's very
exuberant.
youthful. Exuberant, exactly. It's really interesting. So it is interesting to see how the wine will develop. It does have, at the same time, all the leathery notes, all the cigar boxes, all of the, the tertiary aromas. I believe that right now, for somebody who likes that very exuberant Malbec from Weinert, it is a very nice wine to have right now. Well, the Magnum bottles that I have at home, I'm sitting for at least another 10 years to see where it goes for. So that's, I don't know, Toby, if you've, what would you say?
Iduna, I think I'm right in saying that this was the first time, I think, that you bottled a single cask. Is that right?
It was the first time that we bottled a single cask, exactly. So yeah. Thank you for that idea.
Well, no, I mean, I don't know who it came from, but anyway, the wine is fantastic. But in a sense, we're sort of discovering, aren't we, how the wine will mature. And I think also I think Hubert, the winemaker, was surprised because when he did the analysis, what's happened is that in your wonderful cellars, which have high humidity, but even so, they lose a little bit more volume of water, and so the acidity and the alcohol increase. And so you have actually a very fascinating wine that has, it's a very, very special wine with great depth and structure. And also the acidity has increased because the water has evaporated. So you have a very interesting amalgam of a wine that's old, but still tastes, as you say, very exuberant, but also, and in my experience, I think with Rioja, I often notice that when you bottle a wine that's been in cask for a long time, there can be a little period where it's quite a traumatic experience, I think, for the wine, suddenly to find cask. And I think you need to keep it a little bit of time. And then I think we don't have the experience to really know, but I think, as Iduna says, I think the great thing about this wine is that you can enjoy it now. And it is surprisingly fruity and young for its age. I think partly because of this phenomenon of the acidity increasing because of evaporation. But I think also probably the speed of maturation will increase slightly in bottle because you probably have more air and oxygen relative coming through the cork than you did through the barrel. And therefore, perhaps now we will see some of the tertiary aromas arriving. But a lot of people have asked us exactly when to drink it. I've given my best indication, but it is really an educated guess because it hasn't been done before. So we're sort of discovering, let us discover how it evolves together. I think, as Iduna says, it's such a concentrated wine, it will age for a very long time.
Absolutely. It's always a difficult question because, I mean, it is a wine that it's got a lot of age in it. So it's got a lot of complexity and, you know, the perfect time. And it also depends a lot on what one likes as well, right? So I love the wine right now, but Hubert, for example, is the one who loves wines with a little bit more bottle age and a little bit more of the tertiary notes than I do, right? So it is also something very personal. And I always, you know, say to our friends and colleagues, and if you've got, you know, more than one bottle, you know, try one and then try to see how the wine speaks to you, and you relate to the wine to see if, you know, you're going to cellar it a little bit more, or maybe it's at its optimum drinking point for you at that point, right? So it's that's one thing that I've always talked about, that wine tasting or having some wine, right? Wine drinking is something which is very personal as well. So you need to kind of connect with the wine and to see, you know, what type of food you're going to have with that wine and what type of cellaring you're going to do with that wine. What we do produce and what we do want to reflect is wines that do have aging potential. So if you, I don't know, casually forget about the bottles in the cellar, in about 10 years' time, they're still going to be fantastic. So you don't have to rush through and have all the bottles of wine that you have. But just playing around, you know, and seeing where the wine is with your palate is also something which is also good to discover, I guess.
The other question was the special assemblaje, which I think was really made for your 40th anniversary, but it was really a sort of a development of the Corte Classico, which is 3 different varieties. But this one had an amazing blend of older wines and younger wines, didn't it? It was a very interesting blend that you put together.
Exactly. I remember it so well because I called it at that point a Tetris of wines. So back in 2017, it was our 40th anniversary. And we are a very classical and very traditional winery. So it was, you know, I had just come into the company in May, and it was, and with this, you know, our cask collection, we have a lot of wine aging at the same time, right? So we've got up to 10 or 12 different vintages aging in the cellars, in these, you know, the cask collection within the cellars. And I had tasted a couple of non-vintage reds around the world. And I sat down with Hubert and all of our, you know, our team, and we presented the idea of doing a special assemblaje especial non-vintage with a few of, you know, the most interesting casks that we had of Malbec and Merlot, which is the Corte Clásico. So we respected the percentages and the style, the personality of the Corte Clásico, but did a blend of 11 different vintages. So between 2004 and 2017, skipping 2014 and 16, because we skipped both of these vintages, was very humid, a lot of fungus on the vineyard, so we directly skipped the vintages. It was a little bit of everything. So a little bit of 2004, which at that point had 13 years of aging, with a little bit of 2007, which was a brand new unoaked wine, just to bring out, and the idea was to bring out a little bit of this whole story of the Carrascal as one of our, strongest brands, especially in the domestic market. Since '77, we have produced the Carrascal, and it was interesting, or I think that the great thing about the Corte Clásico or the Assemblaje Especial is that it also tells a lot of stories. It also such a layered wine, so much complexity in the bottle, in this wine, that it's meant to be kind of this tour around, or this history tour around since '77 up to nowadays at Weinert. So it was interesting. It was a lot of discussion, a lot of almost fights over, what blend to do and what wine to put. But finally we did agree on the Assemblaje Especial, and yeah, it's also interesting to innovate without losing your essence in terms of the personality and the style that we always are very focused on keeping. Right, we want to keep, of course, our personality and our quality of wines, but as producers, you also want to kind of play around a little bit and innovate and do different stuff. So that's where the Assemblaje Especial came from.
Yeah, I think it's an absolutely fascinating wine, because I think, as you said, it's new, but in a sense, you've built on the traditions, and for me, it's like a sort of Renaissance polyphonic mass. You have the trebles, the altos, and the basses from the older ones, and then maybe the trebles from the younger vintages, which is again unusual in a Weinert wine, because normally your wines are very well aged. So here it had some younger wines in it, but for me there was no discord. It just put another top note to the harmony. And, I think it was a master blend. And I think, as you alluded to, I think Hubert is very, very talented in that sphere, isn't he? I think people again ask, how long will it keep? One of the things we did in both cases with the Tonnelle and the Tonnelle Unico and this was to ask for it to be bottled with a Diam cork, because I think in South America, they sometimes don't get the best corks from the producer. Sometimes you do. So I think these will help the wine be very consistent and last a long time. But it's very difficult to tell, because again, this wine hasn't been made before. But I think 5, 7, 8 years easily. Would you think, Iduna?
Definitely. I think the wine has also been evolving very nicely in the bottle right now. The last bottle I tasted was probably about a month or two ago, and it is a lot rounder. So it's not still going into the tertiary part, but it's definitely more rounder. At one point, when we had just released it in 2018, it was, again, very exuberant, very tannic, kind of a very big, bold wine. So now it's going more into a more mellow and more softer note. But still, got all the grip. So I think that at least, another 10 years will definitely do the wine some interesting. It will become an interesting wine as well. So yeah, and also again, magnums. I'm a huge fan of magnum bottles. So whenever I can get hold of magnum bottles, I do.
Well, I hope that's answered those questions, Anna. Yeah.
So the next question is from Tim Nuding. And Tim, I'm sorry because we cut you off earlier with another question, but if you'd now like to ask.
Oh, hi, it's also Trudy, Tim and Trudy.
Sorry.
That's fine. Thanks for the explanation of the casks. That was actually quite fascinating. I was just wondering, how deep are your cellars?
Our cellars are 7 meters deep, right? So quite deep. And the interesting thing about the cellars that they were also built in 1890. So they're not only very deep, but there's this a wall of stones that surround kind of the cellar itself, which also keeps the humidity and the temperature of the cellar, right? So I'm always amazed. It's kind of like the pyramids. You're always amazed, like, how did people do this back at that point with no machinery or anything? And it's the same thing with the cellars. So they're 7 meters deep. There's beautiful Italian arches. So it's stone walled, and then brick ceilings and arches. So really beautiful. It's like going down memory lane of the wine industry back in the 1800s. So yeah, so that it's beautiful. I'm obviously a huge fan.
And there's a lovely staircase, isn't it? There's really quite a big staircase which you descend, and as you descend, I mean, I'm only there normally in winter, where perhaps it's 17, 18 degrees, but as you descend the stairs, it feels much cooler. And you have this granite wall one side of you, and you go down, and then you start smelling the smells of the cellar, the lovely moist aromas that are in the cellar. And Iduna mentioned the linseed oil that they put on the outside to keep the cask clean. And so it's a bit like going into an old cricket pavilion and smelling the linseed oil on the cricket bats. And it's very atmospheric, And I think the cellar really is part of almost the terroir, part of the character of these wines, isn't it? Because very few people could really build a cellar like that these days. It's so expensive to do so. And this combination of good humidity and very cool temperature is what allows you to keep your wines in the way you do. And I think it's a very special. So I think it was a very good question that you asked about the depth of the cellar, because I think it really is key to the quality of the wine.
Absolutely. I mean, it would be very difficult being in such a warm region and such a dry region. It wouldn't be impossible, obviously, to build a cellar, but to have it refrigerated in these perfect conditions, it would be an enormous expense in terms of energy. And if not, it's just such a region of high temperature changes. During summertime, it goes up to 38, 39 degrees and then down into 16, 17 degrees. So there's so much interchange that definitely the cellars and the temperature, kind of the whole ambience of the cellar is what also allows us to keep these casks and these barrels and the wines for such a long time. And as Toby said, concentrating, the evaporation is not really about alcohol, it's more about water. So it also helps concentrate the wines, but still keeping them in kind of this freshness and the fruit expression is still there, but not losing it. So yeah, so definitely the cellars. And one of the things that I love the most about the cellar is that he's got no internet connection. Your cell phone doesn't work, so it's perfect.
And the other thing that you showed, which is very important, is keeping these casks clean, because it's actually very difficult to keep these casks clean. And it's great that you have sort of Argentinian passion, and then you have a sort of a Germanic precision from Hubert, who manages to keep these things clean and really looks after them. I mean, Hubert's a very interesting chap, I think, because he is at once Swiss, but I think also Swiss-Italian, because as you said, I mean, he's a great mushroom hunter. He's a very good cook. And so he's very interesting that he brings this sort of precision as well as a great love of food and wine. So very interesting chap.
Yeah, absolutely. It's a good combination, the Latin passion with the Swiss precision. Emma, any more questions?
Excellent. Yes, there are. So the next one to come is from Richard Piggott. Richard, are you there?
Hi, Emma. Thank you.
Welcome.
I hope you can hear me. Thanks for putting on the another one of these events. They've been brilliant. Hi, Iduna. Just to pick up on the food matching, it'd be great to know if, other than the obvious steak matches, what you might recommend to try with your wines, and especially some vegetarian things, as more and more people over here seem to be going down that route. Okay,
fantastic. So obviously, you know, it's always a question. I'm actually a huge fan. I only eat meat once a week with an asado. So if I'm going to do it, I'm going to do it properly. But what I love about our wines, and one of the best matches that I find with our wines, and going into the taste profile, you know, the leathery notes, the mushrooms, the fungus, the sotobosque, you know, the saubois. I love our wines with fungi, love it, a risotto or a creamy sauce, you know, with pasta. That is fantastic. But one thing that is also very important in Mendoza, and especially Mendoza as an agricultural region, is that apart from the meat, there are beautiful vegetables, beautiful. You can get the ripest tomatoes that you're going to get, the ripest figs, cucumbers, squashes. I mean, it's really a very rich and beautiful agricultural area. So ratatouille, for example, is one dish that we do produce a lot. We do actually cook a lot. We don't produce it, but we cook a lot because you can get such a beautiful maturation. You get such ripe vegetables as well that, you know, you can get all of these different flavors within like the rich flavors from the vegetables. So ratatouille is one dish that I absolutely adore with our wines. Actually, with a Cabernet Sauvignon, which I'm tasting right now, I think it's a fantastic combination. I love dried fungi. So, you know, fungi secchi. It's also very interesting to do it either as a risotto or a mushroom, a pasta sauce, a creamy pasta sauce. If you want to go into more of a stew-like, but with chickpeas, you know, kind of a spicier vegetarian goulash, for example, that is also interesting with a little bit of broccoli, a little bit of chickpeas. I actually did that 2 days ago, and that went very, very well. I had it with a Carrascal Malbec, so very interesting. So yeah, just play around. Our wines, in that sense, what we want to produce are wines that are good food matches. So they're not too tannic, they're not too acid, they're not too much of anything. We try to have a very good balanced wine, so that, you know, the combination with the food is also easier, put it that way. So those are kind of the vegetarian dishes that yeah, I can think of. Basically, just look for the best vegetables, you know, and grilled vegetables as well. Grilled aubergines are fantastic with the wines. So just, you know, we do grill a lot down here. So I always try to grill whatever I can just to get the smokiness up as well. I hope I answered that question. It's not too much, but.
To be honest, you answered it perfectly. I'm now extremely hungry. We are very conscious of time, and it's just so fascinating. I hope everybody doesn't mind if we just run on a little bit longer. We've had so many questions coming through, so fingers crossed that's okay with everybody. The next question was from R. Smith, who asked me to ask on their behalf that this year saw one of the earliest harvests in Mendoza. This appears to be a trend, as elsewhere, of a warmer climate. With vineyards in one of the warmest parts of the province, how is that impacting your approach to making wine?
Very interesting and very good questions, because it is a fact that climate change is obviously something, that is happening. It is something that has affected the wine growing region of, Mendoza, as well as many others in the world. One key issue, there are a couple of things that, to talk about in terms of climate change. First of all, we can see that the phenomenons are much harsher. So for example, El Niño or La Niña, which are the storms that originate in the Pacific, are coming in a much more higher force, much more humidity, and much more rainfall than 20, 30, or 40 years ago when it started being tracked in Mendoza. Water supply, key in that sense, to keep the hydration, to keep the maturation, so not to have too much hydric stress, because apart from higher temperatures, there's also a problem with water supply. It's either too much in terms of the rainfall of La Niña or El Niño, or it's too little, right? So water supply and the water management and irrigation is the key aspect to keep the wines balanced. And also we have started looking for, we work with many different vineyards. We also work with local producers, so grape growers, basically, which are families dedicated to growing grapes, and they are in 3rd or 4th generation of vineyard growers, and looking for pergolas, right? So the parral, as we call it here in Argentina, just to get a little bit, to balance out some vineyards being just over sun-ripe, put it that way. So, the balancing out and that spreading out within the region is also something very important. We actually work with 20 different vineyards so that we can compensate, the whatever deficiencies they have, and just to enhance their qualities in terms of the blend, right? So, and this year's vintage, it was very weird, memorable for many reasons, but it was the first time that, at least I have seen, Malbec, Cabernet Sauvignon, and Merlot all ripening at the same time by the beginning of March. So especially for the Malbec and the Cabernet, 1 month in advance. At the same time, it ended up being a positive thing because Argentina went into an obligatory lockdown by the 20th of March, and more than 80% of the harvest was already within the winery. So it helped manage the whole situation because it would be just too much to handle. But definitely it is something that has been coming through. And one of the reasons why Valle de Uco as a wine region is also growing quite a lot is going down into the south, into cooler regions as well, and higher altitudes where you can compensate this climate change, or the warmer climate. So water supply, irrigation, very important to control the hydric stress of the vineyards, and kind of spreading out into different sub-regions and different training systems, just to also balance out the amount of the concentration of the wines, right? So that's kind of where things are going.
Yeah, as you're saying about the Valle de Uco, there's a trend, isn't there, to plant some higher altitude vintages, higher altitude vineyards, which are cooler. And as you said, Valle de Uco is to the south, closer to the mountains. You get cooler nighttime there as well, don't you? So that you get very, very high sunlight, so you get maximum photosynthesis to ripen the fruit. But then at night it's cool, and this stops the respiration. So at night often the vines respire and they burn some of the acidity. But where you have cool nighttime air from the mountains, you get less of that. And I think your point was very, very interesting about the pergola system, because it acts, doesn't it, a bit like a parasol, protecting it, very much like the vine training systems you see in the south of France, in Vasso, the gobelet system, where the vine spreads out in sort of 360 degrees, and the grapes hang underneath the leaves in dappled shade, which is ideal for stopping sunburn and moderating the temperatures. And Corral is that system, but in a sort of bigger format, isn't it? And it's fascinating that it's sort of coming back into fashion.
Yep, exactly. It is coming. It was a very traditional training system which had been lost, and now it's coming back back into fashion. And then and obviously no wine region is completely free of problems. In Valle de Uco, you get a lot more frost than you get in Lujan. In Lujan, you get a lot more hailstorms. So this is one of the key reasons why we've always decided not to focus in one sub-region, but to go out into Lujan de Cuyo as a whole, so that you can always ensure the quality as well as the quantity, of course, of the grapes that you can get, right? So, but it is an issue.
Excellent. So Kirk Young now has a question that he would like to ask, and I believe, Kirk, you're there.
Yes, hopefully I'm here. I'm still here at the moment.
Excellent, we can hear you.
Good evening. Thanks so much for that. Brilliant. I'm sorry we can't actually come out and join you and go to your tasting room and appreciate the wines in even greater detail. Could you just clarify a couple of things about your irrigation system or irrigation from the Andes? When does the melting snow come down your way? And I thought you just said that there's some issues with if you're in a desert, but I understand that bit. But when does the water come down from the melting snow, please?
Okay, well, Kirk, I'm sure that we will soon be able to travel again, so don't worry. I will be waiting for you.
No, thank you. You can invite other people as well if you want. You can invite other.
So we are on the opposite, right? In terms of summer and what do you call that? Seasons in Argentina. So right now we're just going into our winter season. So this is when the mountains are stocked up with snow. So snow falling, very important at this point. Everyone is tracking how good, how harsh the winter is going to be. And by September, which is the beginning of our spring, is when you start seeing, the melting of the snow and, the first rivers trickling down. One thing that is also interesting, and this is very, maybe it's kind of a weird thing, but rafting in Mendoza is very big. It's a very big, adventure sport and everything. But you can see by November, especially, so spring starts in September, October. As you go into November and the temperatures really start to rise quite steeply, if you go rafting from week to week, you can actually see in the Rio Mendoza, the Mendoza River, the amount of water, getting bigger and bigger and bigger. So, so it's basically as temperatures go up by spring, that's when you start getting the water supply into the city. Mendoza as a region, a semi-desertic region, and it's actually an oasis. It's considered to be an oasis. If you see the maps of Mendoza, you see the North Oasis, the South Oasis, because all of the green regions or all the plants are around water supplies, be it the Mendoza River or the Lujan River, or all the the different embalses or the little ponds that we've got. I forgot what I was going to say, but basically, and that is when you also start irrigating. So whenever we talk about a vintage, for example, right now we talk about 2020 vintage in Argentina, that vintage was picked by February, March, April in a normal vintage. But actually, in terms of the cycle, you have to go back towards July of last year. So July 2019 is what is going to start keeping pace or start marking what is going to be your vintage in the summer. So spring is in September, October, November, that's when the growing season begins. And then as we enter December and January, that's when summer really starts picking up in Mendoza until we finally go into the harvesting season, which is right in the middle of the summer and going into the autumn. Our autumn for us starts by the end of March. So usually you pick, in a normal vintage, you pick Malbec and Cabernet already into a cooler, cooler climate, not cool climate, but a cooler days into April, okay?
Fantastic. So there's one final thing that's actually just occurred to us. You'd almost think that we've done this on purpose. Toby, there's a Weinert en primeur offer that actually ends this evening. What wines, well, what suggestions might you make for members from this en primeur?
Well, I mean, this time we chose a Cabernet, which I think is delicious. And I think also, despite it being younger than the last one we offered, because this is 2008, it's actually got very nice cedary aromas. And the other thing that's great fun about it is it comes from a vineyard named after Iduna. Iduna, tell us all.
That is true. It comes from Fincas Iduna. So finca in Spanish is vineyard. It is very, very common here in Argentina to name a vineyard after your wife or your daughters. Usually women are named, or vineyards are named after women. So Fincas Iduna, a vineyard in Lunlunta. So Lunlunta, I love this name. Lunlunta is a wine region which is politically, it's in Maipú, although it has always been more considered to be Lujan de Cuyo. We're basically neighbors. And it's a Cabernet Sauvignon from 2008. Iduna was planted in 1982. That's easy to remember because I'm 1 year older. So I always remember that one. And so it's a single vineyard of this Cabernet Sauvignon, and it has aged in the Cask Tonnelle 120, so 120, which is a 2,800 liter tonnelle or cask. So within the aging process of our wines, and I think I saw some question as, you know, the cavas compared to the carrascal, or how do we, the blending or the selection of the wines that are going to each blend really depend and are only determined during the aging process. So it is when the wine is actually beginning to develop where we say we select the wines into the carrascal or the cavas as a cask selection, and then came in, you know, these single vineyards, beautiful wines, which are so much more expressive and show so much more elegance and complexity that instead of blending it with the rest of, you know, the wines, they are left to age a little bit longer and to see what happens, really, just to see how it develops out. It is the last cask of 2008 Cabernet that we have, and it's a small one as well. So it will be the last Cabernet from Fincas Iduna, but it is definitely a very special and interesting project to pursue. I mean, the personality of the cask. Many times we talk a lot about terroirs, we talk a lot about, you know, sub-regions, we talk obviously a lot about varietals, but when you think of the cask having been the vessel of aging of these wines, it's got such a big influence as well on, you know, what the wine is going to become and how it's going to show after, in this case, 12 years. That showing the personality of the cask is also very interesting. So yes, I'm really looking forward to it, to the Fincas Iduna Tonnelle Único.
Yeah, I mean, it's a lovely wine. I mean, it's got a lot of personality that I think Iduna was referring to from the time in this cask. And Finca Iduna is a, you know, a lovely vineyard near the riverbank, isn't it? Near the river, with the alluvial soils that Cabernet loves. And as I said, I think for those who thought that the previous bottling we did of the Malbec Tonnelle Único was a little bit more closed, I think this has a little bit more developments. I think the Cabernet developed slightly more quickly than the Malbec. So this already has some sort of very nice cedary characters. And I think it's a little bit more evolved than the Malbec was, despite being much younger. It's a beautiful individual wine, and the sales have been very good. I think we've already sold out, but we have an allocation system, so please put in your orders. It's not too late, and then we have to divvy them up with the allocation system. But I think it's a lovely wine.
Fantastic. Well, I just wanted to say a huge thank you to Iduna for joining us this evening, and to Toby as well. It's been so interesting hearing the two of you talk and bounce off each other. So thanks so much for that. To all those watching, we really do hope that you've enjoyed this event. All feedback is welcome. The video will be going live onto YouTube, so we'll email you the link tomorrow. And for those of you who are interested in watching more of these events, we've just added 9 new events to our calendar, including a special lineup for Wine Champs Week. So we really do hope that you'll be able to join us. But in the meantime, all that ends for me to say is thank you ever so much to both of you for coming this evening, and thank you for giving us your time. It's been a really wonderful presentation. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Emma. Thank you, Toby. Thank you, everyone, for joining in and for tuning in. For us, it's always a pleasure, and it makes lockdown a lot happier as well down here from Argentina. So I'm looking forward to the next ones from the Wine Society. And salud to everyone.
And to you as well. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks very much, and thanks very much to Iduna for making it happen. Thank you.